Hey everyone. Welcome to episode 22. Today's guest is Jeremy Dennis. Before I begin, I just want to say it's been a month or so since I published the last episode with Milan Faustin. If you haven't listened to that episode yet, I encourage you to check it out. I recently moved to the Florida Keys in early August, and I'm still getting oriented and grounded here, so it's taken me a while to resume the podcast. I have a lot more on my plate these days with college classes and work, so I don't have as much time for the podcast, but I'm still very much committed to working on this project and sharing it with all you listeners out there. Also, because my schedule and living situation is different now, I'm going to record many of the episode intros on my voice memo app whenever and wherever I can so I can get the episodes out on time. So that means that there might be some intros where there is background noise, and I'm going to try to keep that down as much as I can. But for the most part, the way that my schedule is working now, I just have to do the intros where I can, when I can, so I can get them out to you all. All right, back to today's guest, Jeremy Dennis. I met Jeremy 5 years ago, and since then I've seen his art career soar, including Ma's House, an artist residency he founded in 2020-2021. Lots to say. You'll hear me reminiscing about meeting Jeremy in the episode. Here's his bio. Jeremy Dennis is a contemporary fine art photographer, an enrolled tribal member of the Shinnecock Indian Nation in Southampton, New York, and the founder and lead artist of Ma's House and BIPOC Art Studio, a nonprofit art space and residency program on the Shinnecock Reservation dedicated to uplifting Indigenous and BIPOC artists. His work centers Indigenous identity, culture, and the legacies of colonial assimilation, using photography to stage cinematic, otherworldly narratives rooted in Native oral stories, history, and contemporary experience. Dennis is a Stony Brook University alumnus and 40 under 40 honoree, and earned his MFA from Pennsylvania State University. His photographs have been exhibited nationally and internationally with solo and group exhibitions at the Armory Show, Expo Chicago, Zona Maco Photo in Mexico City, and the Minneapolis Institute of Art. So I'm going to skip a little bit of his bio because it's a long bio, but if you go on his website, you can read the full bio. Dennis's creative work often draws on personal and communal histories, tackling themes of identity, resilience, and visibility within Native communities. His major projects include On This Site, Native Long Island, Rise and Nothing Happened Here, and Stories, Indigenous Oral Stories, Dreams, and Myths. And you can read more about these projects on his website. His curatorial projects include Shinnecock Speaks at Ma's House and Eternal Testament at the Church of Sag Harbor. Dennis has participated in prestigious residencies such as the Andy Warhol Visual Arts Program, Santa Fe Art Institute, Yaddo, Watermill Center, and the Vermont Studio Center / Harpo Foundation residency. Jeremy lives and works in Southampton, New York on the Shinnecock Indian Reservation. There was so much more to say, but I didn't want to read the whole bio. I wanted to, but I was like, there's this other part of me that's like, no, don't read the whole thing. But yeah, I encourage you to check out Jeremy's website, read more about him, and yeah, just take some time to learn about his work and all that he's been contributing in his community and the artistic world. So some reflections from this episode. The first thing I'll say is, closer to the end of the episode, I laugh awkwardly at something he says that is actually really serious. So I'm sorry for my awkward laugh. I think I was just tired that day, processing several things he was saying and trying to stay engaged at the same time. So I think that's what that was. I wish I would have had better responses to several things Jeremy shared, but it is what it is. Yeah, so I'll leave it at that. It is what it is. So this part isn't really scripted because I like writing out my thoughts. I like writing out my reflections to share, but also it helps me, process and understand what I really resonated with in an episode. Because I just wanted to get this episode out because it's actually going out late. I'm just going to share my thoughts free stream. There were three things that, every episode, I learned so much from each guest. So I never want it to seem like, oh, there were these two or three things that really stuck out. Like every episode is like a gem. When I say, here are these two or three reflections, it's just a sort of highlight something in the episode that made me, that, I think is interesting or insightful. One thing that Jeremy shared was this exhibition he shared work in called New Mythos, where the topic involved, or I'm not sure if it was a part of the exhibition theme or if one artist had shared work around this theme, but it was around, Indigenous origin stories, Indigenous creation stories, and Jeremy talked about Sky Woman. And we got to talking about, where we come from. It was very brief. Like I would have loved to deepen into this part of the conversation of origin stories. Because I personally, and I say this in the episode, I'm really interested in like where we come from, where I come from, where you come from, where we collectively come from. Some people believe that we all collectively come from some place or someone or something, and maybe other people don't have those thoughts or beliefs. But I think just this idea or rumination of like, where do I come from? And all the ways that we can answer this question, we could think of this question, and I'm going to say these different ways like they're separate, but they all could be intertwined. Like where I come from could be me researching my bloodlines, my lineages. Where I come from could be, the place I was born, or the place that feels most like home to me. I could come from, or people could say, I come from this river, I come from the ocean, I come from this mountain, I come from the lava that comes out of this volcano. Like we could get really creative, but for many people to say that, I'm from the ocean, is very real for people, or I'm from this forest. It's very real. So, and it's both. It's like it's poetic and artistic and, all of that, but it's also like, no, I actually I actually come from XYZ. So, your bloodlines, a place, an environment, other life like trees, animals. Of course, there are people who um, come from and believe they come from different star systems, so they're star beings, and many people are interested in their star heritage. And in my mind, I believe many, if not all of us, have multiple heritages, and we could think of it as I come from this place or I come from multiple places. And like this just opens up so much. This question of like, where do we come from? It opens up so much because you could think about it for yourself, for your family. You could talk about this question with your friends, with your community, your cultural group. And then it comes to like, where do we all come from? Is there such a thing as we all descend from a place? We all come from a place. We all have something that's shared among us with all our differences and all the things. Is there something, a common ancestry of some kind, a common origin? So, yeah, one of the reasons, and I feel like I'm going on here, but one of the reasons I work with water is because I do think water is a common origin point. And I think there are many or several common origin points or several places where we could all say we come from. We all of us are of the earth. Even if you are someone from Andromeda or wherever, you're still in a fleshy, earthy human body. So that's one thing no one can escape. We are all of the earth. So that, and so, yeah, I just think that I just could be in that kind of imagining and reflecting and wondering with this, where do we come from? And if you do come from a cultural group or a community where you have origin and creation stories that have been passed down, that's also really interesting. How do you steward those origin/creation stories? How are they passed down? How are they understood in new ways? How do different generations understand one particular creation story? And what is it to create origin and creation stories, your own, but to suggest origin and creation stories for your community. And yeah, it's just pretty fertile, that rumination there. The second thing that Jeremy brought up, I asked him, about him doing ancestral research for his projects Nothing Happened Here and On This Site. And while he was answering, he shared there's a reason for why XYZ is happening, for why XYZ is taking place. He gave the example of like why he is the way he is, why this person in the community or this person in the family member is the way they are. And I told him, I said, yes, absolutely. Things aren't just, people and things and places aren't just how they are for no reason. And that's the biggest thing. Well, not the biggest thing, but it's one of the biggest things for me when thinking about ancestry. It's just like, we're all not just out here just, we are the way we are. We're thinking the way we're thinking. or not thinking, just, just because, but actually we have been informed, shaped, influenced, impacted, whether we know it or not, by the people before us, in our families, um, the people who raised us. That uh, if we look at a place like, I don't know, just think of a place that place has a history. There's a reason why there's a reason. And I just think that's so important because I think the context we were talking about this, the context was about like, um, yeah, that Jeremy was also talking about inheriting historical traumas and how that shows up. And I'm sure for for this episode and what he was talking about before, how have native peoples across Turtle Island and around the world, places and people that have been colonized, how have native communities here on Turtle Island inherited historical traumas because of colonization and cultural assimilation and boarding schools and all of the different things that various native communities and families and people have experienced. That and some and see, this is gonna go on. I'm gonna start going on into, I can hear myself like wanting to like prove why this is real, but like I don't have to do that because even if you don't have a bunch of scientific evidence to like back this up, it makes sense. If you just think about what your ancestors may have experienced when they were alive, and you know that they lived through certain traumatic historical events, you just have to think about it. Like, how would this affect this family member, which would then affect this family member, which would then affect this family member, which would then, you know, um, and so this is really important because when we look out in the world and um, we see those energies or those efforts to sort of minimize um, or like minimize colonization, um, minimize genocide, or it's not that big of a deal, let's move on, the past is the past. But what I'm trying to say, maybe I'm not articulating it very well, is that like there, even though something has happened and years, decades have passed, hundreds of years, that trauma can still be alive in certain people's lines and families, not certain people's lines and families in the body, in the psyche, the nervous system, the subconscious, wherever it's at. So it's like, I just feel like, to wrap this up, it's like when we look out in the world today, I'm sorry, I gotta say it, with the current administration, it's like we're not gonna deal with anything. We're not gonna just work through it and sit with it. We're just gonna just get rid of the things that we don't want to hear about, that we don't like. We're gonna keep sweeping it under the rug. We don't care what you have to say. And it's like, that's making it worse. That's not making it better. That's making it worse. That's not, no. And it just feels like I'm sure every healer and their mom has something to say about what I'm saying. Um, I'm just, like I just had this recent experience where like I felt like I healed through something and realized that just because time has gone by and because I don't think about the incident, the the things that I've went through, just because I don't think about it as often anymore and it's out of mind, out of sight, and I've moved on and like, oh, look, I'm moving on. And it's like that doesn't mean that I didn't heal what needed to be healed. So sometimes, I guess I'm just trying to say sometimes it might look or seem or feel like something has been healed when actually it hasn't. It's actually very much still there. And so I just feel like there's all these things that we can do to it mimics like healing, or we think some kind of healing is going on, and actually it's just sort of it it just that unresolved, all what is unresolved just remains. It just remains, and then it manifests in different ways that either you're aware of or you're not, but it's like it's still there. And then we get into the Insta therapy, and someone's gonna be like, it's okay that it's still there. Like, let me tell y'all about this Insta therapy. You go out there, you listen to Instagram therapy, you're gonna hear all sorts of things about like why it's okay that it's there, why it's like all of these different things. That's another thing. Like, we gotta start getting some more clarity on what actual healing is, because I just go out in the world and I see so many perspectives and opinions, some of which contradict each other, and it's like, can we is there is and we're all heal in different ways, so don't get it twisted. I'm not saying there's a uh cookie cutter uh cookie cutter healing for all of us, but I think it would be nice to it yeah, I don't really know what I'm trying to say. I guess maybe more than like trying to like answer my own question of just putting out there, which we could see on an individual or on a micro to macro scale, how something that's not actually been addressed and healed, whatever that means, is just still there, still unresolved. And anyway, wow. See, this is why I write out my reflections, so I don't go 20 minutes in one direction and now I'm in the other direction. All right, finally, an altar to/for the past. Jeremy and I get to talking about the past. And this is another episode where the past is being uplifted again. And also, the future, past, and present are one and the same. I do like to distinguish the dimension of time called the past, where it's what has happened, what has already happened. Like yesterday was logged into the past. 5 minutes ago was logged into the past. I can't go back into the past, or can I? And yeah, we were just talking about guidance from the past, guidance as a thought leader, or guidance, or the past as a thought leader. The treasure trove of learning and lessons and wisdom that lie in the past. And then I was like, oh my gosh, this sounds so good. It sounds so poetic. Oh my God. And then I'm like, well, if someone wanted to make an altar to the past, they could make an altar that reveres events in the past that caused harm and suffering and violence and dominance. You could have an altar to the past. You're revering harmful ideologies. So what exactly would an altar to for the past, what would that be like, And that's another question that's a rabbit hole. But for me, an altar for the past would be like honoring the past, like having deep reverence for the past, which is massive, massive, massive. Some might, refer to the past as the past is the same as the future and now. Some might refer to the past as the Akashic record, Akashic records. It's memory, vast. And I'm like, yeah, that warrants respect. Like, lots more to say. Lots more to say. Yeah. I tell Jeremy I'm a futurist through and through, and so even with my own self, I think a lot about my relationship with the past. And I think it's helpful, I'm realizing, to think about the past in my own life before or simultaneously while I think about the past of like bigger events. Because sometimes I think it can be easy to like talk about how to relate to the past when it deals with like larger collective events. But then when I think about my own life, then the energy switches and I'm like, oh well, blah 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 blah. So well, hopefully everything I just shared was clear, made some kind of sense. And if not, hit me up, ask me like, hey, I didn't really understand what you were saying when you said blah blah blah, and I will communicate better and see how I can get my point across. But hey, thank you for being here. Thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate it. If you feel inclined, please comment on the Substack page. Please share this episode with anyone you think may be interested. Yeah, it's just really helpful to get some sort of feedback. It helps me and the guests and other listeners know that you're listening too. I think what's really important now during these times, these historical times, as Jeremy said, is that we need to be giving each other feedback that actually we aren't just talking into the void, that people actually are paying attention to many of us, and that we got to start, if we aren't doing this already, we got to start letting folks know, I'm listening to you, I'm paying attention to you, I hear what you're saying. And the way that my mind works is, signals and communications. We got to start letting people know that I received what you just shared, what you just broadcasted. I'm listening. I hear what you're saying. And I'm going to respond back to you by putting out this. We got to start. We can't, like, I know on Instagram there's this, like, and I do it too, I don't want to like that person's post. I don't want them to know that I'm reading their stuff. I'm just going to watch. Like, we can't do that anymore, especially with what's going on in the world right now. We got to start letting each other know, letting each other, people who are interested in, oh, love. I don't know. We got to start letting each other know that we hear each other. Um, your signals being received, and so we can all be in communication here. Otherwise, it, like, you know, because if you can imagine, okay, see, and I'm if I'm starting to I'm bring it back. All right, y'all, that's it for now. Thanks so much for meeting us at the Through Line. I hope you enjoy episode 22 with Jeremy Dennis.
All right, listeners, if you can / want to, please take your time listening to this episode. Make a cup of tea at home, find a cozy cafe, or listen on the go. Either way, I hope you find at least one thing in this episode that is interesting, sparks your curiosity, is helpful, or inspiring in some way. Until next time. Welcome to the podcast, Jeremy. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
That's great. That's great. Just want to let the listeners know before we press record that there seems to be a little bit of a lag, so you might hear that, but all is well. So, my first question for you, Jeremy, is you are an enrolled member of the Shinnecock Indian Nation on Shinnecock territory in Southampton, Long Island, in New York, if people don't know that. So for anyone who is, totally unfamiliar with the Shinnecock Nation and even Long Island, what would you tell them?
Oh, sure. That's a great grounding question. I would say that we're based, everyone knows where New York City is, so we're 2 hours east of the city on Long Island, New York. A lot of people have heard of the Hamptons as well, so we're just like 5 minutes west of that. And we're a small, essentially sovereign nation, Shinnecock Indian Nation here in Southampton. And we have about 600 tribal members. We're part of the larger Algonquin culture, so that might span all the way from Maine and north, all the way down to New Jersey and beyond. So we have a big network of sister tribes here. We're also really deep into our history and traditions. I think next year we're going to have another one of our annual Labor Day weekend powwows, which is every cusp of August and September, Labor Day weekend. So that's when we really highlight and share our culture with the public. Another really interesting thing is we have been here for over 10,000 years on this site. So somehow we've retained connection with Shinnecock territory, even though many tribal nations have been forcefully removed way beyond their traditional land. So we're a modern people today and have a lot of exciting things, but also things that we're overcoming.
Mm. Yes, 10,000 years is a very long time. Like it just to think about that and like what, people in the past living um on Shinnecock territory, what life must have been like, for 10,000 years and holding on to that land. Thank you for sharing that. I felt like that was a great first question to ask because, you know, some people might not even know that much about New York. So I thought that that could be a great first question. And I'd love to know, how would you describe your homelands, like the land and the waters there?
Oh, sure. For those who have never been, we're also along the coastline. So Shinnecock itself translates to people of the stony shore. So we have today a beach called Cuffy's Beach, which is named after one of the tribal families who have long been connected to this place. It's on the Shinnecock Bay, so it has a little bit more wildlife, horseshoe crabs, seaweed, much warmer than the ocean beach. So that's the one that everyone goes to during the sun rises, sun sets. Really pretty over there. Mostly the tribal territory, which is about 800 square acres of land, or 1 mile north to south. It's largely residential, so it's a space where everyone's interrelated. Sometimes we have people who have spouses who marry and then they move on the territory. So it's a little bit of that. And then on the northern strip, that's along the Montauk Highway, which is the main connecting route west to east. So we have many tribal businesses, mostly cigarette and marijuana projects. So I think that many people know us for that. Some might know us for the powwow, and then others might know us for the Shinnecock Monument, which is a 3-story tall LCD screen on the highway, a little bit west of our main territory.
I feel like I've never been to a powwow, which that's a lie. I did go to a powwow when I was a kid, but I feel like if I ever go to another powwow, I want to go to the Shinnecock powwow. So whenever I can get back there, I'd love to um attend that. But thank you for sharing. Yeah, it's just nice to get a sense of like where you are and the community where you live. Um Speaking of which, whatever you want to share, I'd love to know, like, what are some of your favorite memories growing up on the land there? Because I was watching the Moss House documentary to prepare for this interview, and there was like this picture of you as a kid. And it's so interesting seeing ourselves like as kids in pictures, because I've never seen a picture of you as a kid until that documentary. So I was like, I wonder what it was like growing up there.
That's another a good question and great memories. I think it was just always having that freedom and because you do have that huge family network and everyone is mostly familiar, you had a lot of ability to just bicycle or wander or go through the woods and always felt safe. There's so much nature here. It's very dark at night, so you can see the stars. And some days you can also both hear and smell the ocean and the waves, along with the Shinnecock Bay being so close nearby. But yeah, just growing up here, a lot of people still think we live in traditional housing or wigwams or teepees, but it was just like anywhere else. And we went to the local school districts. We were part of like yeah, the scouts. We had different clubs that we attended in town. So it's pretty familiar to what many other people experience. But the unique thing is that many of us have family allotments. So sometimes people grow up in the same house and live there their whole lives, or if they have the means, they might build a small house next to their parents or grandparents' home. Sometimes there's three generations in the same house. Sometimes like first cousins move in as they're growing up or transitioning. So yeah, a lot of family. And then maybe after high school, a lot of people at Shinnecock stay, but other people, they might have the wealth or the means to move to New York City or move wherever they'd like. So we're a little bit of a bubble in that sense when it comes to yeah, the benefit of staying in community versus having the option to go away and afford that lifestyle.
Wow. Yeah, that reminded me of someone I used to know in Queens where um what they did with the house is that like the grandparents would move upstairs and then the parents and the kids would be downstairs and like they would cycle through the house, if that makes sense. And so then when the parents would get older, they would go to the or the top or it was the bottom. But it was just like this family kind of cycling through the home. And so yeah, it's really interesting thinking about like, if you grew up on your homelands there and you could stay there or you could go somewhere else, but maybe you might not have that option, which I didn't think about. um do you find that people want to leave, like people around both of our age, we're both in our 30s, or do people want to stay?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think it changes individual to individual, but I do think a lot of people want to have both occur at the same time, just because land is so important to our identity, and there is that big issue in Native communities where sometimes we're pushed to the margins, or there's no resources or jobs or colleges nearby, so it's hard for you to both live on the territory and find income or opportunity. So sometimes when you go away for school or you get a scholarship, it's so far from home that you aren't able to just come back and relax and have familiarity. But there are other people who have made it work, and sometimes they just come back for holidays or for a powwow, but they often miss home. And um, nowadays we have a Facebook group or different Zooms so they can join in remotely and still hopefully be part of the community.
Mhm. Yeah, that sense of home is really, really interesting. Like if you've grown up on your ancestral land and all of your family or most of your family has grown up on your ancestral land, and just that sense of home is very interesting to me. um, I'm so curious, like what do you like currently, what do you love about where you live and what do you wish was different?
That's a yeah, interesting thing to think about just because in the Hamptons you sometimes have the top one percenters, and it seems like there's so much ability for change and things to get better. But I think in the Hamptons there's a lot of limitations and rules and like zoning codes, things like that. So even though people do have like over the top houses and mansions and yeah, that's like 10-bedroom houses, I think that beyond just their personal houses, there's not a lot of communal spaces that are for different passions or interests or hobbies. So I think that there is a limitation in terms of what can happen in the Hamptons. I think most people just depend on the beach and then in the off season go away somewhere else for the most part. But I would love to see a lot more art and especially art and opportunities for younger people. It is a much older generation community. It's like a retiree community in ways, and very yeah, white in population demographics. So I just went to the Swaya, the Southwest Indian Market in Santa Fe this past August, and I was amazed at just the amount of native artists that live there, work there. They had hundreds of booths with individual artists and galleries. And then the turnout was so amazing too, because I was there a little bit early that week, went to the plaza where it's held, and it felt like there were maybe 3 dozen people walking around. But then on the weekend, it was just thousands of people that somehow fit in that little area. So I think that's a model that is so successful and supportive of Native artists. I'd love to see something like that in the Northeast. Just a huge way to focus on maybe a mix of traditional and contemporary art and have it be like an art market similar to the Armory and the print fair that is happening this past weekend. We do have, of course, the powwow, but that is a mix of all these different things from like dances, storytelling. There's a little bit of traditional food. It's very temporary. It's like a outdoor pop up, so you never know what the elements, if it's gonna rain or things are gonna blow away. So I'd love to have some sort of event space, maybe on Shinnecock or something that's a little bit more stable and a destination. So yeah, a lot of these dreams that it would improve the quality of life and income for tribal members.
That would be amazing. I could see that. And I love New Mexico so much. I actually was in Santa Fe this summer, and I did have a chance to go to it was like it was an arts market, but it was like a few blocks long, and the art was gorgeous. And I'm sorry I couldn't get any while I was there because I was buying some other stuff, but I hear what you're saying. Like, I mean, I wouldn't know, unless I came across it whenever I was in New York or near New York City. It's like unless I came across something like that. So that would be really cool, especially with Ma's house and everything that you're doing. It would be really cool to like know where to go, and to support people because when I did get a chance to visit, I did come across this one person from Shinnecock who makes like these earrings. And so, but that person was on Instagram. So I think having a physical space could be really cool. I'm going to ask you more about New Mexico. Um, but oh wait, here's a question about New Mexico. So you are a contemporary fine art photographer, and it's really been amazing to witness what you've been doing over the years. You're like the sun or something because every time I look over at what you're doing and what Ma's house is doing, it's very vibrant and that's beautiful. And I don't know all the places you've traveled, but I know as an artist you have traveled to different places for exhibitions and artist residencies, and one of those places was New Mexico. Is New Mexico. So like I said, because I love New Mexico, I'd love to know like what is your connection to New Mexico? Like, what have your experiences been like there?
Absolutely. I, as I mentioned, was there, I think it was August 17 that weekend. And part of the reason for going was I've never been to Swaya, which is the big native art market. And the reason for that was I just never had the ability to just like pay and travel to go. I think a big draw is if you're vending, or if you have a booth as a native artist, is a good incentive, but to get there from New York is really hard. So this year I was actually invited by Cara Romero, who's one of my big native photographer influences. She has a gallery there in downtown. So instead of doing an
Mm,
outdoor booth, she actually just has like a year-round storefront. So she decided to invite myself, a handful of other
mm,
indigenous artists, and had a pop-up. And I was thinking it was going to be something like in New York where you go to an opening, like in Chelsea or in the Hamptons, and maybe like 30 people show up, but she's such a big name and community member that there were like 600 people who came through over 2 hours. So I thought that was so
wow.
amazing to see, inspiring. Yeah. And so I had maybe 5 pieces in that show relating to preservation of the Shinnecock Hills. Other artists in the show had work relating to the exhibit title, which is New Mythos. So kind of like new ways of telling our creation or where we come from. So it was a theme that I really loved too. But that was this past August. In I believe it was 2020. That was like my first time going to Santa Fe, and I went for the Santa Fe Art Institute, which is an amazing residency. That's where I went to do a lot of my current body of work called Rise. So I went there, did some self-portraiture, work with volunteers to stage some imagery about the land back movement. And I think since then, I just always wanted to go back whenever possible, keep working on that series. Here in the Hamptons, everyone has such a huge stake in not allowing things to change. Everyone wants, especially when it comes to the land back movement, just because real estate and housing and land is so valuable. So everyone wants to keep things how they are. But for Shinnecock people, we're dealing with sea level rise and encroachment on our territory. So we're always thinking of different ways that we can um, get small slivers of land that has been taken from us. So that's part of what the art series I'm working on now talks about. So I first went in 2020. I went for 2 months, and then I went back this past February to the same residency. And then in October, I think late October this year, I'll go back for a month. But it might be a little bit chilly, so maybe I'll just go and organize my thoughts and go to other art spaces while I'm there. Mhm.
Wow. Yes, New Mexico is amazing. I love New Mexico. I'm so glad that you're meeting people there, meeting people who inspire you, and just connecting with the place and people there. Um, you said two things that really interested me. One, the new the new mythos, where like you explore different, like you explore different ways of, or you, what am I trying to say? Like you said something about like you explore where you come from in new and different ways, and I'm like really curious about that. As far as like creation stories, do you mean, like using different language or perceiving something differently?
Oh, sure. I think I don't think it was the very earliest stories, just because in native communities we have stories about like origin of plants and animals and even communities and people. But for the most part, I think a lot of the works dealt with maybe linking back to historic moments of maybe change or transformation or things that have uh, maybe historic injustices. But there was one artist, Shelley Nero, who's a few generations before me. She had included works about Sky Woman. That's one of the Haudenosaunee creation story. Some people call them just stories themselves or myths and legends. Those are a little bit more, I would say, inaccurate or derogatory just because it diminishes their validity. But sometimes they're described that way. But it talks about maybe the first Haudenosaunee or Iroquois people who came down from the sky world, landed on the back of a turtle, and started Turtle Island after accumulating soil. So instead of having it in like that early prehistoric depiction, Shelley actually had, I believe, one of her relatives pose as Sky Woman, and it's a little bit of collage. So it had some abstract patterning. It had this young woman flying in the sky, and it was really just a pretty way of representing a story that we all know, just in a new way that's even more relevant than ever, since it's someone who's probably living and someone who is from present time. Mhm.
Wow, yeah. I wish I could see that because I am personally interested in like, where I come from, where we come from, whether it's, our bloodlines, if we're speaking more like spiritually, cosmically, land wise, just this whole idea of like where you come from and creation stories is just really fascinating and how people tell those stories. Because it's like when we think about where we come from, that can mean many different places or people. Um, but also, you talked about the land back movement and what you're working on with that. And I think it's really interesting to explore that living in the Hamptons, because the Hamptons is a place where there is the 1% and lots of wealth. And I'm just curious, like, what would that look like for Shinnecock to have more land? Like, if you had to literally dream that right now, if you knew the places, like, what would that be like?
Yeah, sure. Such a big question of like what are the possibilities, and I think the biggest fear that people who do have surplus land are worried about is that we'll just kick everyone out and remove everyone. I think they think that we'll just use it to a lesser extent or won't utilize it to its full capacity. I do think that when it comes to stewardship, I think that's such an important word for the land back movement because, for the most part, when you look at people who decide how the land is used, sometimes it's towns or counties or town boards, and sometimes it's park systems, the governors, mayors, and usually it's never indigenous people who have either taken care of the land for thousands of years or stewarded it. And as such a kind of simple observation, but also um, powerful when you remind people that we've somehow taken care of this land and made it so hospitable and somehow didn't pollute everything where you can't drink the water anymore and there aren't diseases in animals everywhere and plants are abundant and you can just go out into the woods and forage for food without needing to adapt the sort of the Western farming style. So I think that there's a lot of imbalance currently. And when it comes to land back, I think that's a good starting point. Just having Native people at the table when it comes to like what are we going to actually do with the land as it is, and then what do we do about spaces that are too built upon or developed, and then other section is what do we do with natural resources, so places that do have a chance of maybe becoming even more beneficial for the environment itself, but also for people to maybe protect it. Mhm.
Hmm. Yeah, so what I'm hearing is, include Native people in conversations and decision making, um, and stewardship, um, which is which I feel is something really important to think about because there are a lot of issues. There's a lot of issues going on. So it's like if you stop and pause and think about like which is, because I've heard a lot about um, what would life be like if more if um, more Native people were given, you know, or I don't want to say were given, if Native people were stewarding more of the land and the waters, which reminds me of the Shinnecock kelp farmers, and like what would life be like? And I know that people are talking about like integrating different ways of knowing and being, but I think you're really um, saying something really important about, well, first, can can you be included? Is that right?
I think so, but there's so much there in terms of just environmental protections, which most people agree with, the urgent need for either slowing down or undoing the climate change, but also the historic injustices of how the land was stolen in the first place. I think that when I look at America and how Native people are citizens and all of our current day accomplishments and like medical advances and space exploration, I'm always caveating everything with, oh, it's all amazing, but also done on stolen land. So how can we truly celebrate all these things without uh, resolving things that made it possible in the first place? Or um, I think that's something that is an inconvenient truth, but it's part of uplifting all of us. So I think that a lot of those things that I did mention, sometimes it is like the ultra wealthy who are at the forefront of those accomplishments. It's like special interests. Sometimes it's biased groups who are doing these things that end up benefiting us or advance us, but also their wealth to do that and the means to do that also came from maybe inherited wealth from those land transactions.
Mhm. Yeah, and this brings me to my next questions because you have a lot of really cool projects, and I wanted to ask you about all of them, but one that I felt really called to that you did several years ago. It was in 2016. It was Nothing Happened Here. So let me just say my question because this is how my brain works. So your work focuses on Indigenous identity, culture, and assimilation through photography. And you have this project, Nothing Happened Here, which you did in 2016. Before I get into my questions, can you let our listeners know what that project was about? I know that's so long ago, but I feel like it's still really relevant. It's like that project feels like it's always going to be relevant.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I love that series. Nothing happened here. I think I started in 2016, but it actually was in response to my own project that I did around the same time called On This Site, and it's a survey of Long Island's native history. And I was doing a project that looks at our origins, it looks at our archaeological sites, sacred sites, our contributions as Indigenous people, just locally. And when I was in public school, and I think we all have the Thanksgiving story, we have the Wampanoag story. Maybe we learn about Iroquois because we have to learn about New York State uh, native history. It's part of the curriculum, but nothing really locally. So I was in my mid 20s when I started these two projects, and it just was a shocking moment of as soon as I sat in the archives or looked at some of our history books, how much that was there. That was just not taught to myself and other students who would have benefited from it. So I wanted to work on the photojournalistic side of just creating like a digital archive that anyone can access, anyone can learn from at their own pace. But um, that was one side of the project. The other totally separate one was the Nothing Happened Here series, which looks a lot like the Saint Sebastian images, where the Christian saint is shot by arrows as a martyr, but he somehow survives this execution because of his faith. That's why they're trying to execute him. And he's sort of saved by the grace of God in those images. But in my work, it's a little bit, I guess it's a little bit related just because it's about the pain and the suffering that we endure as a country. But it's about this invisible pain, just the burden of why do we, as a nation, carry this trauma of how the nation was formed? Like next year in 2026 is the 250th anniversary of, in my mind and in the mind of many Native people, the anniversary of a nation being built on a nation that never really disappeared. I say a nation on a nation just to make it simple, but before Europeans, there were, of course, hundreds, if not thousands, of tribal communities. But just the basic essence of forced removal, assimilation, colonization, enslavement, all these things that have happened and everyone knows it, but there's never been any real meaningful like apology or reparations. So in this body of work with the, for the most part, it's Caucasian individuals who have arrows sticking out of their torso. It's just meant to take something that is a mental or invisible pain and make it visible. And I thought um, when I started this project that it might have been too violent or too graphic. Maybe people wouldn't get it, but a lot of people just love the aesthetic of it. A lot of the images look painterly or cinematic. So I think we're sort of used to that in like pop culture and cinema, just sometimes seeing violence And um, I think in America it's much more like gun violence than arrows. But I think the arrows kind of represent the indigenous presence. So for the most part, in my work as an artist, I always have native people, whether it's portraits or stage imagery. But the arrows in this body of work represent that presence somehow. And I think a lot of people immediately read it that way, as if people are just enjoying their life in America, and then somehow these arrows are maybe fired from maybe hundreds of yards away. Maybe they have always stuck into these individuals and I've just been living with them. So there's all these different readings. But I do sometimes work on this project every once in a while. Like if I'm not in the mood to do history research or I don't want to do self-portraiture, sometimes I just carry around like a little arrow with the pointer or the arrow point cut off so I can just poke people and create more
Hmm.
images. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I mean, when you describe this body of work, it kind of reminded me of like the Twilight Zone or a Black Mirror episode where, a person is walking around with arrows in their body, but they're not aware of it, or maybe they are, but they're carrying on as if they don't have a bunch of arrows in their body. And yeah, I think it is a really interesting question of the traumas and the pain that the country is carrying, and what seems like will continue to carry until things are resolved in particular ways. Um, and I don't know, this project really, I have like several questions about it. When I was on the website reading more about it, and you talk about doing ancestral researching your ancestral history for Nothing Happened Here. And I wonder, based on your research and making art and just living life, how would you say your identity has changed over the years, from, say, you were a teenager until now? Just like learning about yourself and then, you know, coming into this knowledge of like, hey, why isn't this included? Why did this happen?
Oh, sure. I think that a lot of it is just personal readings about perhaps where does our pride come from. Sometimes, well, this wasn't a conversation when I was growing up, but I see it nowadays with parents. Like they want to control what their children are taught, and anything that isn't American pride related is too inappropriate or it's traumatizing, or they're trying to protect their children from hearing sort of the truths of what happened here in America. So I'm thinking a lot about um, just things that maybe are hard to hear, or maybe people are just trying to um, allow children to learn the basics, and then maybe if they're lucky later in life, they'll learn some of these things. But in my personal, just like delving into our ancestral history, it's so empowering just to know where certain current day issues come from, certain patterns in whether it's like substance abuse or behavioral issues, where a lot of these stem from. Sometimes you see family members, whether it's immediate or relatives, sometimes acting out or frustrated or um, seemingly to have just anger issues, for example. I think a lot of people um, are inheriting historical traumas. They're also living with the current day predicament of economic disparities. So I think these are things that we inherit. I don't think that we're born to be poor, or we're um, meant to stay a certain way. And I think that circumstances have led up to this point. I don't think these are issues that occurred a few years ago. So I think as we all hopefully get a common understanding, we'll start to realize the work that has to be done or undone, paths to move forward by looking to the past. And a lot of the other current day events that are happening outside of Shinnecock, and tribal communities. We keep seeing the mottos like never again, and we have to learn our past to not repeat it in the future. So I think these are things that apply universally.
I love that and I resonate with that because I was just talking to someone where I was basically saying, I'm interested in ancestry because I didn't grow up with a strong ancestral connection, but when I started learning more about the role of ancestry, I started making connections on like why I am the way I am or why this family member is the way they are, why our family has this dynamic. And it's it's so interesting like to realize that you're right, like people aren't just how they are and situations aren't just how they are just because, but that there is a past. There's a literal past and also some people I'm a futurist, um but and I'm slowly like getting more connected to the past, but I do know I feel like there's resistances to like the past, the future, and people are like just be here now, which I totally agree with, but also like the past holds so many answers, I feel like, or has so much guidance. So I really appreciate what you're saying because sometimes I feel like the past doesn't get as much love. It's like boring and um, like, it's over now. Like, why are we still talking about this? Like, how do you think in your experience people feel about the past?
I think it's a mixed bag because on that scale of time, like on timelines, for example, um, people are so, well, I would say in historians and historical societies, preservation officers, it's kind of a small community of people who are like anything that you demolish that's historic is such a sin, and we have to preserve everything that's a certain couple of hundreds of years old, whether it's architecture or objects. So I think that is really interesting. But for indigenous people, many of our sacred sites don't get that same protection or awareness or care. So I said the number earlier that we've been here over 10,000 years. So I think that it is hard for people to even fathom, even beyond their grandparents' generation, like how far in the past that is. So for a lot of people, they just tune out when they start to have to do the work of conceptualizing and making something relevant that seems to not be. So there's that issue. And then sometimes I listen to like art lectures while I'm doing emails or working or driving. And someone said something recently that I never thought about, but just this idea or opinion that when people are doing like creative writing or visual art or anything creative around identity, they described it as being a downer. This was a African American creative person. So I never thought of it that way. I thought it was like, oh, this is like self-love. It's so empowering. It's being proud of where you come from. But I did see validity in that, just having to talk about trauma, talk about things
Yeah.
that have happened, and trying to make a better future for ourselves. So I think it is something that you have to be aware of when you're doing representational work or work about identity and culture. I don't think anyone has that intention to make everyone sad around them, but I think you do kind of have to like touch on that point, or at least be aware of it, and hopefully allow people to step into the space and not exclude people or shame people immediately.
Yeah. Yeah, I think about that a lot, like that space of acknowledgement and honoring, um, and that, that the trauma and the pain or whatever being heard and seen and just acknowledged, and also it also being that same space of like possibility and like how can all of it exist in the same space? Because like a lot of the things that have happened and it's like there's no way around it. Is, like there's no way around it. Yeah, but some things are just gonna make you sad. I don't know. Or not. Or, I don't know. Um, but see, now I got kind of, I think I mixed my questions around, um but for Nothing Happened Here, you also talk about how, people might know broad, general, maybe vague histories about Native peoples, but they might not know a lot about, their local histories. And I just moved to the Florida Keys, and I'm like, I got a whole treasure chest of history to learn about this region. Um, and I travel a lot, so I think a lot about like grounding in a place is to know about the place. So I'm just curious about your perspective on learning about local histories, because it just seems like that's a way for people to connect with indigenous land and waters.
Oh, absolutely. Well, the way I like to present it, just because there's so much history to choose from, like what do you start with, what do you focus on, what hooks people's interest, and then at the same time we're also living in historic times, which seems like not good historic times, but also future traumas that have to be resolved.
Mhm.
But I think that when it comes to history, it's so exciting to uh, always talk about and bring up because, as we mentioned earlier, it just is a source of where we are today, just a lineage and through line. And so I like to share tribal history in terms of space and land and places that we maybe work at or pass by or public parks that we enjoy every day. So instead of looking at it in history class format of in the beginning, that's like year zero, and then we're in 2025, I like to do it in terms of maybe I have a museum show that I was invited to do, and I just want to see what Native history is just within that area. And then if people want to learn more, they can keep learning about history outside of that area, their neighbors' spaces, and so on. So I think this is powerful because mapping is such a colonial tool. It's just used to kind of divide and conquer in simple terms. But for indigenous people, borders have never been maybe a concept for sovereignty or for identity and for exclusion. So using mapping is sometimes problematic in terms of I'm working with place names, sacred sites, tribal affiliations, and territories. So a lot of the like the shapes and the lines I'm adding are also arbitrary in that way. But I do like looking at history. I wish that maybe for future generations, I'm the one who's currently digitizing a lot of the work that's done before me. A lot of that work is sitting in archives, sitting in analog books that haven't been available on Google or anywhere online. So I'm doing the slow process of typing it up and scanning it for everyone. And then I'm hoping um, maybe the younger people at Shinnecock can make movies or documentaries or their own paintings and photography about this content. And as time goes on, the ambitious goal is to do all of that work for the 10,000 years we've been here, from archaeological evidence up to newspaper clippings, and then catch up to present times. So it's important for people to know that Native people and culture are dynamic, we're always changing, and um, there is no endpoint for our story.
Wow. Well, when I was looking at on this site, um, Indigenous Long Island, I was just thinking, like, this is an amazing contribution. And that's when I wanted to tell you, like, you're really contributing some amazing, just amazing projects, including Ma's house and thinking about the generations. It's like, yeah, you're the generation who's digitizing everything, and that's gonna mean a lot to a lot of Shinnecock youth there, and all the other indigenous youth on Long Island and people who aren't indigenous. Like, That feels like such a great contribution, and I feel like it's important to let people know, like, you are, I mean, I'm not from Long Island and I haven't been to New York in a while, but I'm like, I can see that this is very impactful, and I'm sure for your community. I had a question about on this site, but I feel like I want to get to some other questions because our time is winding down here. But I hope you feel that way because there's some amazing things going on here. Um, okay, so you also have another major project called Stories, Indigenous Oral Histories, Dreams, and Myths that explore like the unknown and mysteries of life. And this one really intrigues me because this is my jam, like the mystery of things. And I'm just curious, is there one story or dream you captured through photography that really fascinates you out of all of the stories and dreams you were going through with that project?
Oh, sure. I guess it's a combination because there's this one image. Um, I'm, I probably shouldn't even try to pronounce it, but it's a story I came across in 2017. So I would say between 16 and 17, I was reading all these stories, trying to decipher which ones are um, actually technically possible to depict in a photograph, because a lot of them were, of course, oral stories. You just maybe told them around a fire, for example, and use your own imagination to see what they look like. But in a photograph, that is so hard to pay attention to all the details, like what scene do you actually focus on? And for me, it was always those moments of like what sets our maybe spirituality apart, or these moments of transformation apart. And one of the really exciting things that I came across was this idea that if you dream, sometimes people have this gift where they can maybe um, ob- ob- maybe obtain, maybe observe, maybe channel new stories or new messages through their vision or through their dreaming. So I really love that idea of we have this treasure trove of hundreds of creation stories, but there are possibilities for new futures. I think some of the stories actually told predictions of what was to come, and then there's others where, of course, you're maybe talking to a past loved one or an ancestor. So I'm hoping that one day I can figure out for myself how to channel that generation of stories. So there's
Mm.
actually one that within the story itself describes that process. And then I also have another Indigenous artist mentor. Well, I guess more of an inspiration, Shinupahanska Luger, who I wrote a random email to him just because I was so questioning of my own work, like unsteady of the idea. And he said that all of them are valid. They're all someone's experience as a human being. They maybe imagined it, daydreamed it, maybe they were hallucinating, maybe they were also sleeping, and this message came to them. And he explained how all of those are different valid ways of telling that story. So that was kind of the on and off switch, like providing confidence for my own body of work. And I think about that moment and a couple of other ones, including one with the artist Steve Locke, who really gave me confidence for my Nothing Happened Here series. So I always think about how those moments really gave me courage and kept me going, and how other artists, maybe they're in silos or maybe they haven't shared their work and gained that kind of that flag to keep going and to have that acceptance.
Wow. Well, I'm so glad you found that courage and that inspiration. Um, yeah, these, you know, channeling from dreams and visions, or being receptive, I feel like is such an interesting experience. And I wonder what it must be like to be like receptive there on Shinnecock, and what dreams you might be having there, or anyone there, what anyone there is receiving or what's coming to them. It's very interesting. So I feel like I have to go back to that project and look at more of the photos. But it is interesting how you capture your ideas through photography. Okay. Because I always have way more questions than I have time for. I'm gonna ask like two more questions. I had more, but we're just gonna go with two more. So the way that we connected was like years ago. I had my mixed media collage project. It was called Culinary Art House. I think we connected on Instagram. It was around the pandemic. And I think that was around the time you started building Ma's house, and eventually I had the opportunity to do an artist residency there, which was so memorable and so fun. And I'm very grateful because, I didn't get a lot of artist residencies, especially during that time. So um, that was just, I had such a great time. Um, and So, if people want to learn more about Ma's house, you could go on the website. There's a documentary which I'll link in the show notes. But, if I had to ask you one question, from the time I saw you starting Ma's house to me being there to like 3 years later, like so much has happened. And, you know, what has it been like having so many different artists come through over the years?
Oh, definitely. It's such a great question too. And um, yeah, I'm looking now, and you were here. I believe it was, yeah, maybe 2 weeks in July 2022. So that was the summer after we opened the former year. And I remember you did, the open studios back when we had, the gallery space a little bit more informal. And I think back then we were still figuring out like what are we even doing? What programs should we do? One of the great things that happened since you were here in summer, I remember, was that you participated in the poster making workshop for the beach back access protest that we did. So we made
Mhm.
posters, and then we went to the beach and protested among the wealthy people who, just because of our presence, were so annoyed and yelling and disturbed. So I thought it was successful. I still have those newspaper clippings that have you and the poster featured in them.
Oh,
So
wow.
there's that connection. And now we're in 2025. So the great thing that connects back then and now is I have a couple of works relating to that history of gaining access for tribal members to our local beach, in the works on water triennial. And we have our
Mhm.
yeah, mutual friend Sarah Stewart, who's part of that. And so I think it's so great that the work that you're doing is kind of moving in parallel and continuing with the momentum. And these things that happened years ago are still relevant now. So it's kind of like a summation of our earlier conversation. But since you've been here, I think you were about our 12th or 13th resident. We've had maybe 70 since then. We developed a second residency room within the house, so hopefully two artists can be here at once. And I think every program that we're doing is slowly growing. We're building a detached studio on the property, which is modern, but it's a little bit modest as well. So we're excited about that. And yeah, everything's just tracking along. I think the interesting thing you mentioned was that it was one of your earliest residency experiences. And for whatever reason, a lot of our alumni, that was the same thing that happened to them. Whether it was not feeling safe in certain residencies, or they felt too exclusive, or too um, maybe old and white in some cases, or maybe they simply weren't accepted or rejected, or their work was too social justice oriented. I think that for whatever reason, we've attracted artists who were so talented and passionate, but just weren't seen for their full potential. So I'm so honored that We started with this modest space, and so many artists have applied, come through. We have a huge wait list of artists who are also interested. So we never send out rejection emails. We usually just say, oh, it didn't work out this year, or the schedule was full. So hopefully in the coming years, we'll try to have it happen.
Yes. Yeah, I that's amazing to hear. I do see all of the artist like highlights when you put up their photos. I see all these different people and their work. And it's just so cool to see Ma's house growing like this. And it's also cool, like I knew I wanted to start a podcast years ago, but it's funny that I was on Ma's house's podcast and now you're on my podcast. But yeah, if I can remember right, I'm pretty sure Ma's house was the first artist residency where I stayed somewhere. And that was a huge opportunity for me because, as many artists know, it's no fun. Like it's just a really great opportunity, to be seen and have space to work on your work and like someone sees you're doing something. Um, Oh my gosh, yeah, just so grateful. I've kind of, I'm still an artist, but I've kind of stepped back a little bit from the artist world. Um, but I felt like that was, just I'm grateful. I traveled from Arizona to do the residency anyway. But that's really cool that you all are still growing and um, thriving. I just think of the word vibrant. That's what I think about. This is also such a side note. I'm randomly asking this question now, but I'm so curious. Why is Ma's house red?
That's a good question. Uh, well, when I was growing up in the house, it was sort of a dark, I would say maybe even a faded maroon red. So it was definitely, one of those, chemical mixes of paint that probably wasn't properly for exterior use. It was probably sun-baked. It was a little bit sad. So this is my grandmother and grandfather's house. They had many children. My mom was the youngest of their children, and then I'm the youngest grandchild. So of course when I inherited the house somehow from one of my first cousins, he moved out after a few years of disrepair, and yeah, the house was pretty much uninhabitable at that time. So my family and I, we refurbished it over the pandemic, and of course the front facade was one of the things that really needed to be totally redone due to just like stripping and weather damage, mold, structural issues. So that was one of the first things that we redid, and we wanted to keep it red how it always has been, but because we're not on like the Suffolk County I guess the plots or in their district, we were able to go like any crazy color we wanted to. Instead of taking that kind of like faded red, I just went to the store and got like the brightest possible red. So it was even brighter. I think when you were here, it was bright red, but now it's been baked a little bit.
Wow. And there you go, folks. That's the story for why Ma's house is red. I love the red. It's the red is giving, vibrant, bold. I love it. Yeah, well, I'm gonna keep up with with what you're doing in Ma's house. And this has been a really great interview. Thank you again, Jeremy, for being interested in being on my podcast. Do you have any last thoughts on your heart?
Yeah, just so grateful that you sent this invitation. Good to catch up with you. Yeah, I thought that was another part of the mission of Moss House, just to inspire visiting artists to stay in touch with Shinnecock, go off and maybe take some of our elements and go off and create an ecosystem for other BIPOC artists who are similarly minded or looking for support or want to support as well. So yeah, thanks again for your thoughtfulness.
Yes, thank you. And I forgot to say this in the last episode. Thanks so much for meeting me at the Through Line, Jeremy.
Definitely.
um, yeah. All right. Take care.
Have a good day. Bye now.